Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a question that causes a lot of confusion for growing nonprofits. You're trying to keep things simple by filing the shorter IRS Form 990EZ, but does that simplicity carry over to state fundraising rules? Let's find out. We're breaking this topic down as part of our multi-state fundraising compliance series, which is all about giving nonprofit leaders and their finance teams some practical, clear answers. This explainer is brought to you by our friends at Ironwood Registrations. All right, let's get straight to the heart of the matter. It's a really common assumption, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense. If you file a simplified federal tax form, you should be clear of all the state fundraising rules, right? Well, as we're about to see, that simple assumption can actually lead to some pretty serious compliance problems down the road. So to get this all cleared up, we're going to start with the misconception itself. Then we'll break down the difference between federal and state rules, look at what actually triggers a registration requirement, uncover a kind of surprising reporting difference, and then we'll wrap it all up with how you can plan for your organization's growth. First up, let's tackle that common misconception. We really need to understand what the Form 990EZ is and why it causes so much confusion in the first place. So, the 990EZ is, in a nutshell, a shorter, more streamlined version of the standard IRS Form 990. It's really designed for those organizations that are active and growing, but their finances are still relatively straightforward. So who uses it? Well, typically a nonprofit that files the 990EZ has annual gross receipts somewhere between $50,000 and $200,000, and their assets are also below certain IRS limits. And here it is. This is the single most important takeaway of this whole explainer. Just because the IRS offers you a simpler federal tax form, that has absolutely zero impact on what individual states require for fundraising. You've got to think of them as two completely separate systems. Which brings us to our second section, federal versus state rules. To really get this, it helps to think of these as two separate worlds. You've got the federal tax system, and then you have the state fundraising system. So on one side, you've got the IRS at the federal level. Their whole job is to oversee your tax filings, and they're the ones who tell you whether you can file a 990 or 990EZ. But on the other side, you've got individual regulators in each state, and they're concerned with something totally different, protecting the residents in their state from fraudulent fundraising. They're the ones who decide if you need to register to ask for money there. And this right here really gets to the core of it. States just don't care which IRS form you file. What they care about is your activity. The question they're asking is simple. Are you asking for donations from people who live in our state? If the answer is yes, that's what triggers their rules. Okay, so if it really is all about activity, what specific kinds of fundraising activities are we actually talking about here? Even if you're filing a 990EZ, you're almost certainly doing many of these things to support your mission, right? You're running online campaigns, you're sending out email appeals, you're posting on social media, maybe holding events. The second those efforts reach the residents of a particular state, you might have a registration requirement there. And this perfectly captures the modern challenge. Your website's donate button, your social media posts, your email blasts, they don't just stop at the state line. They go everywhere, which means even a small organization can suddenly find itself with fundraising compliance needs in a whole bunch of states. Now, for an interesting little twist. Sometimes filing that simpler federal form can actually lead to more paperwork at the state level. I know, it sounds completely backward, but let's break it down. The whole point of the 990EZ is that it's easier, right? It requires a lot less detailed financial information than the really comprehensive, full Form 990. And because it's less detailed, some state regulators will look at it and say, this is a good start, but it doesn't give us everything we need to see. They have their own disclosure rules, and the 990EZ might not check all of their boxes. So what happens is, when you go to file for your registration or your renewal, a state might come back and ask for extra information. They might want to see more detailed breakdowns of your revenue, your program expenses, your fundraising costs, or maybe more complete balance sheet data. Basically, things that would have already been included in the full Form 990. So, with all of this in mind, how should a growing organization really handle this? Well, the answer is to stop thinking of compliance as something you react to and start building it right into your strategic planning. It's a pretty straightforward, proactive process. First, you just need to identify your fundraising footprint. Where are you actually asking for donations? Second, take some time to understand the specific rules in those states. And third, just make it a part of your regular operational calendar. Build those registration and renewal deadlines right into your annual planning. And the benefit of doing this is just huge. By planning for these obligations ahead of time, you make sure your fundraising can continue smoothly without any interruptions as your donor base grows. You completely avoid that crisis moment of being told to stop fundraising in a key state. So, if there's one thing you take away from all of this, let it be this. Compliance is determined by where you fundraise, not which form you file. So the real question for your organization isn't which 990 do we file, it's where are we asking for support? Answering that simple question will put you on the right path.